When man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we'll eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict.
Them wasn't just the film that launched the giant bug genre. It was the film Jack Warner said he hated that accidentally created Davy Crockett, that put Leonard Nimoy in his first screen role.
It is one of the best science fiction pictures, you son of a bitch.
And became the highest-grossing film Warner Brothers released all year, directed by Gordon Douglas and starring James Whitmore, Edmund Gwenn, Joan Weldon, and James Arness. It cost a fraction of what Warner wanted to spend and earned more than anything else on his lot. Here are 14 facts you never knew. Fact 14. Jack Warner refused to watch his own film and called it an embarrassment while Them was still in production. Jack Warner made his position on the project abundantly clear. He reportedly told anyone within earshot that he wanted nothing to do with ants, that the premise was beneath the studio, that giant insect pictures were an embarrassment to Warner Brothers, and that he had no interest in seeing the finished product. He stuck to that position through the entire production. Then the film opened in June 1954 and became the studio's highest-grossing release of the year. By some calculations, the most profitable single film Warner Brothers produced all year. Jack Warner's publicly stated contempt for a film about radioactive ants was measured against his studio's annual financial results and found to be completely wrong. He changed his tone after the box office figures arrived. The ants he had refused to watch had made more money for his studio in 1954 than anything he had personally championed. Fact 13, it was originally planned as a color 3D film. The studio killed both ideas when Them entered production in the fall of 1953. It was not the black and white film audiences eventually saw. Warner Brothers had planned it as a color production shot in 3D, a format the studio had used successfully on House of Wax the previous year. Test color photographs were taken of the large-scale ant models. Then the studio got cold feet. Warner Brothers' all-media 3D camera rig malfunctioned when the time came to shoot the 3D test footage, and no usable material was produced. Within days of that failure, a memo went out. Color and 3D were both scrapped. 2 days before principal photography was scheduled to begin, the budget was cut and the film would be made in black and white standard format. The only remnant of the original color plan is visible in the film's opening titles. The word Them appears in vivid red against a black and white background, a ghost of the production that almost existed. Specific camera setups designed for 3D remain in the film. The flamethrower shots aimed directly at the lens were built to send fire through a cinema screen. Fact 12, the ants were purplish green, not black. The mechanical ant models that appear in Them are widely assumed to have been black in the natural color association with ants, and with the film's black and white photography, they were not. The models were constructed in a purplish-green color, a deliberate effects choice based on how those tones photographed under the production's lighting conditions. The mechanical ants operated off-camera by a crew of effects technicians needed to read on film as dark and visually distinct from the environments they moved through. The specific purple-green was the color that produced the correct result on black and white stock under the practical lighting of the desert and storm drain locations. Nobody watching the film in 1954 could have known this. Nobody watching it today can see it. The monsters that audiences found convincing and unsettling were colored in a way that would have looked completely ridiculous in a color print, which is one of several reasons the studio's decision to drop color may have served the film better than anyone intended. Fact 11, only 3 ant models were ever built. The mechanical ants that appear throughout them. Number 3, that was the complete inventory of full-scale ant models constructed for the production. 3, the film's climactic battle in the Los Angeles storm drains, the sequence audiences remember as an overwhelming, swarming confrontation, was achieved with those same 3 physical models positioned, moved, and reshot to suggest a larger population. Additional scale was created by intercutting footage of real ants, filmed at close range and enlarged through the optical printing process to appear 9 to 12 feet long alongside the mechanical models. A production that Warner Brothers had already been reluctant to fund, could not afford to build enough physical ants to fill the frame. The illusion of a vast colony was constructed from 3 mechanical props, some real insects, and editing. The creature production that launched an entire genre of science fiction filmmaking was built from less than most audiences would ever guess. Fact 10. Edmund Gwenn was in constant pain from arthritis throughout the shoot. Edmund Gwenn was 79 years old when he played Dr. Harold Medford in Them, the Elderly. Scientist whose expertise in entomology drives the film's investigation, he was already a celebrated figure. He had won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Miracle on 34th Street in 1947, playing Kris Kringle, and had received a subsequent nomination for Mr. 880. He brought to them the same specific quality he brought to everything: warmth, authority, and an effortless command of the camera. What the audience never saw was that Gwenn was suffering from severe arthritis throughout the entire production. The desert heat in the Palmdale and Mojave sequences reached 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and he worked in full wool clothing. He was helped on and off set by his personal valet. His pain was entirely invisible in the finished film. A 79-year-old Oscar winner, in constant arthritic pain in 110-degree heat, delivered one of the film's most authoritative and assured performances. Nobody on screen could tell. Fact 9. The ant sound won an award and was made by tree frogs. The sound of the giant ants, the high-pitched, pulsating screech that announces their approach before the audience ever sees them, is one of the most effective pieces of audio design in 1950s cinema. It was built from recordings of bird-voiced tree frogs, Hyla avivoca, found in the southeastern United States. The frogs' calls were processed, layered, and adjusted in pitch to produce a sound that carried genuine disorientation, something that couldn't be placed or predicted in terms of direction, making it functionally alarming even before any visual information arrived. The sound team won a Golden Reel Award for Best Sound Editing. The sound that made audiences grip their armrests in theaters across 1954 was tree frogs from the American Southeast manipulated into something the human ear registered as deeply wrong. The most unsettling audio in the film had nothing to do with insects. It had everything to do with how effectively the wrong sound in the right context creates fear from nothing. Fact 8. Leonard Nimoy appeared in a small uncredited role. Leonard Nimoy appears in Them as a young Air Force sergeant, a small, essentially background role with minimal dialogue. He was 23 years old and had no significant screen credits. His face is visible, his character functional but unremarkable, and his contribution to the film so brief that most viewers have never noticed him. In 1966, 12 years after Them, Nimoy was cast as Mr. Spock in Star Trek, beginning one of the most sustained character relationships between an actor and a role in American entertainment history. The young man standing in the background of a 1954 giant ant film as an unnamed military sergeant became, over the following decades, one of the most recognizable faces in science fiction. His appearance in Them is confirmed and documented. It predates his fame by more than a decade. One of Star Trek's defining faces made his way through the same frame as radioactive ants before anyone had any idea what he was going to become. Fact 7. Walt Disney came to cast James Arness and left with Fess Parker. Walt Disney attended a private screening of Them in 1954 with a specific agenda. He was developing a television series about Davy Crockett and James Arness, whose physical presence and screen authority had already been demonstrated in The Thing from Another World, was on his short list of candidates for the lead role. Disney watched the film. Arness performed well, but Disney's attention kept being drawn to a different actor, Fess Parker, playing a Texas rancher held in a psychiatric ward after reporting an encounter with flying ants. Parker's role was brief, a single scene, minimal dialogue, one day's work on the production. Disney found something in it that he couldn't stop watching. He left the screening with Parker in mind. Instead of Arness, Parker was cast as Davy Crockett. The series became a national phenomenon, and Davy Crockett merchandise generated over $100 million in retail sales within a year. Arness subsequently became Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, a role he held for 20 seasons. Disney had come for one actor and discovered another. Both men were fine. The ants had launched 2 careers in a single afternoon. Fact 6. The screenwriter lost his producing credit for fighting to keep Edmund Gwenn. Ted Scherdeman wrote the screenplay for Them. and was also positioned to serve as producer on the production. When Jack Warner became involved in casting decisions, a disagreement arose over Edmund Gwenn. Warner did not want Gwenn. His reasons were not fully documented, but his position was clear. Sherman disagreed and refused to drop Gwenn from the production. He fought for the casting with enough conviction and persistence that Warner, in a retaliatory move, stripped Sherman of his producing credit and replaced him with David Weisbart. Sherman retained his writing credit. Weisbart, who had the professional sense to keep Gwenn's casting in place after taking over, produced the film without reversing the decision that had cost Sherman his title. The man who wrote Them lost his producing credit for insisting on a casting choice that most critics consider one of the film's strongest assets. Warner punished the right call. The film benefited from it regardless. Fact 5, the film began as a police mystery and hid its monsters for a third of its runtime. The structure of Them is deliberately and unusually patient. The first 30 minutes of the film operate as a conventional police procedural mystery. A child found wandering in shock in the New Mexico desert, a destroyed general store, a corpse with unexplained injuries, and a series of events that have no apparent explanation. No giant ants appear, no scientific exposition frames the investigation. The audience is given the same fragmentary information as the detectives and works through the same confusion. Director Gordon Douglas understood that the film's power depended entirely on withholding the premise that an audience told immediately about giant radioactive ants would spend the film watching for them rather than experiencing them. The monsters arrive a third of the way through, and by that point, the procedural groundwork has built enough investment in the world that the revelation lands with genuine force. A film remembered for its monster sequences was constructed so that those sequences couldn't exist without the investigation that preceded them. Fact 4, the Los Angeles storm drain sequences were the real thing. The film's climactic battle takes place in the vast concrete storm drain and flood control network beneath Los Angeles of an infrastructure system that stretches approximately 700 miles under the city. Those sequences were not built on a studio backlot or dressed to look like underground tunnels. They were filmed in the actual storm drains, specifically at the Tujunga Wash Flood Control Channel. The scale of the genuine infrastructure, the width of the channels, the height of the concrete walls, the institutional blankness of the environment gave the sequences a physical reality that no set construction could have replicated at the budget available. The Los Angeles Department of Public Works had built the storm drain network specifically to prevent flooding. Them used it to stage the last stand of humanity against a colony of radioactive ants. The city that built the tunnels for flood control didn't know it was also building the backdrop for one of science fiction cinema's most effective climactic sequences. Fact 3. James Arness appeared in back-to-back monster films for different studios. James Arness played The Thing, the alien creature, in Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World in 1951. 3 years later, he played FBI agent Robert Graham in Them for Warner Brothers. In the same 3-year span, he had been the monster in one major studio science fiction film and the hero fighting monsters in another, for 2 entirely different productions with no connection to each other beyond his presence in both. The coincidence gave him a specific and unusual position in early 1950s science fiction cinema. The man who had been the alien threat was now on the side hunting it down. Arness's height, 6 feet 7 inches, had made him physically perfect for the Thing's looming presence and made him equally imposing as an FBI agent standing against giant ants. He went on to Gunsmoke after both productions. John Wayne, who had seen Them, personally recommended Arness to the producers of that series. The tallest man in the room kept finding that science fiction and westerns were equally interested in what he brought to it. Fact 2, the film was selected for the National Film Registry. In 2017, the United States Library of Congress selected Them for preservation in the National Film Registry, the institution's annual selection of films deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant to American cinema. The selection acknowledged what scholars and genre historians had been arguing for decades, that Them was not simply a popular science fiction film of its era, but a genuinely accomplished piece of filmmaking that established structural and tonal conventions the genre still operates within. The police procedural opening, the patient withholding of the monster, the use of institutional response, military, scientific, governmental, as the framework for dealing with an unprecedented threat, the implicit nuclear anxiety running beneath a surface-level creature feature, all of it was them first, and everything that followed it operated in a space the film had defined. The Library of Congress put it in the permanent record alongside films that most people would consider more obviously significant. It belongs there. Fact 1, the film launched the entire big bug genre and then watched inferior imitations flood the market. Them opened in June 1954 and grossed enough to make it Warner Bros.' biggest film of the year. Within months, every major and minor studio in Hollywood was developing a giant creature feature of its own. Tarantula arrived in 1955, The Deadly Mantis in 1957, Beginning of the End with Giant Grasshoppers in 1957, The Black Scorpion in 1957, Earth vs. the Spider in 1958, the genre that them had created with disciplined patience and genuine craft was immediately colonized by productions that took the monster and left everything else behind: the procedural structure, the scientific grounding, the deliberate pacing that made the creature's arrival mean something. The films that followed were faster, cheaper, and almost uniformly worse. Them had demonstrated that a giant insect film could be made with intelligence and restraint. The industry looked at that demonstration and concluded that intelligence and restraint were optional. The film that invented the genre watched the genre immediately forget what had made the original work. That is the specific fate of every film that does something well enough to be copied. And there you have it. 14 weird facts about them, a film Jack Warner refused to watch, built from 3 mechanical ants and some tree frogs, accidentally launched Davy Crockett, put Leonard Nimoy on screen for the first time, and invented an entire genre that promptly forgot everything it had learned. Which fact hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the classics that built the science fiction world we still live in. Until next time,